Hey guys, what's up? It's Finch here. We're back for another Metagame Monday. I hope you guys have enjoyed the last two. For those of you that don't know, we've covered a couple topics pertaining to the SSOU metagame. Each Monday, we have a 40-minute to an hour-long video roughly covering a very important topic, going into detail on potential examples of why the topic is relevant and also into details on how it might impact you, your games, your teams, and more. So definitely be sure to check those out. They're in the playlist that I'm going to leave on my channel. But anyway, today we're going to be discussing balanced cores and team building of balanced teams. For those of you that don't know, this generation tends to be a pretty balanced heavy generation, while lately we've been seeing more and more other archetypes being used, such as hyper offense. For example, we've seen a lot of Sun teams recently, which is pretty cool. On the alternative though, balance is just the most common archetype this generation, and there are a lot of good reasons why. Before we go into all of these little sectors of balance and why balance might be the most important, I just want to say that the reason why I personally believe that balance is the best is that the Pokemon that are the most effective and consistent find themselves constantly used on balance. For example, the Toxapex and the Clefables of the world, they simply are the most accessible on balance teams. They make it the most convenient, and also, on top of that, the power creep that things like DLC brought leaves it so that checking these Pokemon is a lot less possible on more bulky offensive teams than it is on balance teams. Sometimes you have to resort to a balance core in order to check things like Magearna, or Shifu, or Cinderace, the three most powerful Pokemon in the metagame, arguably. And because of that, it is definitely really important that if you're going to be a consistent player in the metagame, you at least familiarize yourself with the balance archetype. But coming to balance teams, it's really worth noting that you need to have enough offensive presence as well. While the defensive cores that I just alluded to are important, it's something that we're going to get to throughout this video. It's also worth noting that you do need offensive presences, offensive pieces to the ultimate puzzle. We're going to be doing a video on speed control next Monday, I believe, so that's part of it, but there's also different breakers and progress makers which we're going to get into as well. With this all said though, before we go one by one through the different things that are important, I'm going to give you guys a team building checklist which you guys can hopefully adhere to when building your teams. It's not perfect and it definitely doesn't cover every single last intricacy, but if you follow these general points and guidelines, odds are you're going to be able to pilot a team to decent levels of consistency. Sorry about the little background noise there for a second. I just had to shift something, but now we're good. So this is the balanced team building checklist for the Metagame Monday number 3. There are a whole lot of things I go into here, and they will also all be covered throughout the later portion of this video. So if you want me to elaborate on any of these things, then definitely check out the entirety of this video. And if you happen to like this video, it'd mean a lot if you guys could leave a like below and comment your favorite part or any questions you have, because not only are comments good for the amazing YouTube algorithm, but also I love interacting with you guys and helping you out. So if there's anything I can do to help, let me know below. With that said, if you guys enjoy these content in general, also feel free to shoot a subscription my way, or don't. I can't control you guys, but anyway, let's go through the checklist now before I continue to plug myself for all of eternity. The first thing that's important is hazard removal. While heavy-duty boots have helped hazards, in fact, there was a team I used in the world called Pokemon that had 4 Pokemon with heavy-duty boots, and then another Pokemon that was pretty much not getting hazard damage regardless of that. It was, you still need removal, because not only do those boots get knocked off, but also you can't use boots on everything. Well, you can, but I wouldn't personally advise it. With that said, though, there are some things that are vulnerable to hazards no matter what you do. For example, Pokemon like Mandibuzz, Volcarona, Cinderace also usage, but especially the former two, people are trying to gun at them to get knockoffs off, because if you're able to knock them off, then they're taking the hazard damage. Something like Mandibuzz is easily taking knockoffs more than anything else in the metagame, for example, because you see Pokemon it commonly interacts with, like Clefable, Tangrowth, opposing Mandibuzz, Ferrothorn, all gunning to get a knockoff on it, and if they're able to succeed in doing so, then it's going to take 25% from Stealth Rock upon entry. It's a very common thing that happens in the metagame, and because of that, having defog to remove those hazards, potentially outlast opposing entry hazard setters, is still of the utmost importance. Defog is not the only way to remove hazards, of course. There are also rapid spinners like Excadrill who can serve a similar purpose. And on top of that, toxic spike absorbers such as Toxapex and Amoonguss also can thrive within the context of the SSOU metagame. That's also worth noting, even if they're not direct hazard removals such as defog and rapid spin. Moving forward, another very important part of balance teams is Stealth Rock setting. While you can't always fit spikes and or toxic spikes onto your team, and they definitely shouldn't be viewed as mandatory elements of teams, Stealth Rock borders upon mandatory. I don't think it's 100% mandatory in this metagame where heavy-duty boots and defog are as common as they are, but in long games, it's more wise than not to include them on your team, and I'd say that if I were to build 100 balanced teams, 95 to 99 of them would have, 95 to 100 of them, I don't know why I said 99, 95 to 100 of them would have Stealth Rock, and I'd be pretty confident proceeding with that. The reason being is, not only is Stealth Rock arguably one of the best moves in the game, despite heavy-duty boots becoming in popularity this generation, but on top of that, the Pokemon that set Stealth Rock are still very good Pokemon in the metagame regardless of that. Things like Excadrill, Hippowdon, Ferrothorn, Blissey, etc. all are great Pokemon in the metagame. Yes, I said Blissey, by the way. We're going to get into more of the Blissey versus Chansey debate later on. But also Blissey and Chansey are both viable Stealth Rockers. Anyway, tangent aside, that is a very common part of the metagame. Same with spike setting, but again, it's a lot less common and certainly far less necessary. I'd say if we were to take the same example of 100 teams, maybe 15 to 20 of them would have spikes or toxic spikes. Moving forward, speed control is another very important part of team building of balanced teams in the SSAU metagame. In fact, I'd argue that every team should have sufficient speed control in order to get by against certain threats in the metagame. Of course, it also depends on the defensive Pokemon you're using, as they could shut down some of the faster offensive threats, but in general, it's better to be safe than sorry when it comes to speed control. Next Metagame Monday is going to be dedicated to speed control in the metagame. It's not going to be limited to the scope of balanced teams, it's also going to cover bulky offensive teams, semi-stall teams, and hyper-offensive teams. But it's still a very important topic, and while I will touch on it today, I definitely would stay tuned next Monday, the 20th, for more on that. With that said, another important part of team building that I feel a lot of newer players happen to overlook is having a Volt Switch immunity. Volt Switch is super important right now as Specs Magearna is running rampant, and having something to force it to click Flash Cannon or Flare Cannon as you go to your Toxapex or Amoonguss or Rotom Heat is really important, as otherwise they're not only going to take momentum and just completely run away with the game and there's not much you could do, you just feel helpless, but also, if you're able to predict that Volt Switch and get in with your ground type safely, then you're going to do amazing work. And there's a game that I'm going to be showcasing later on this week when I played Solwyn for the World Cup Pokemon, which showcases how important having a Volt Switch immunity and also using the Volt Switch immunity in the proper fashion is in the context of the SSU metagame. It also, of course, is helpful for things like Zeraora, Rotom Heat, etc. So it's not limited to the scope of Magearna, but it might become more of a thing that I would recommend than say you must have, something that's mandated if Magearna gets banned in SSU, and I definitely think that's something that's going to happen in the near future, so, we'll have to wait and see. I'm not tier leader anymore, but I definitely am still in council, and I gotta say, my personal opinion is Magearna is busted, so let's see what comes of it. Anyway, the next Pokemon, or type of Pokemon that's important is a Status Absorber. It's another thing that's a bit less black and white, and something that I think newer players tend to struggle with, so I'm going to elaborate on this more later on, but basically, you want something that comes in on Scalds and Toxics and says, okay, I'm either fine eating this to status, as in it won't bother me, I'll be pivoting in and out anyway, or, alternatively speaking, something like a Magikarp user, which is the status, I don't care. The fact of the matter is that statuses like Scald Burn, Toxic Poisons, and even Thunder Wave are of the very, common nature in the metagame right now. You're seeing status users galore, and also, on teams that use things like Hex Dragapult, pairing it with status users is just very common practice. So therefore, ignoring this just because you're focused on countering specific Pokemon is not ideal. It's as much of a thing that's important to counter as a lot of Pokemon are in the metagame. And it's something that, while it might be a bit less linear or intuitive to check and counter, you really do need to account for within your team building as well. Then there are offensive presences. You definitely need offensive presences. You can't just sit there for hundreds and hundreds of turns. I know some balanced games tend to go that way, but the fact of the matter is that you do need your offensive catalyst, something to really make progress. And oftentimes, for newer players, these are the focuses of teams, and they try to say, okay, I'm going to build a balanced team, but I want to make sure I have Cinderace, or Dragapult, or insert other offensive threat here like Specs Magearna, Nasty Plot Rotom Heat, whatever it might be. And that is a completely valid way to construct your team, so if you're doing that, I commend you. However, personally, I also like to build in a quote-unquote backwards fashion where I pick my defensive core and then I try and find what offensive Pokemon fit onto the team the best because of that. Because some people struggle against certain defensive cores, or some defensive cores hold specific merit against potential options we might encounter that others do not. And because of that, I think that you could really build starting with whatever you want, so long as you incorporate the other parts of this checklist later on. Another thing that I want to say is that these offensive Pokemon have to be progress-oriented. Generally speaking, Pokemon that are all hit or miss tend to be a bit less consistent and lead to team building being more shaky or filled with holes in order to compensate for that. So for example, things like Volcarona can fit very well into balance teams, but you need to have a bit more support for that, as it's more of a hit or miss sleeper than things like Cinderace and Zeraora, which not only are functioning in speed control or as offensive weapons, but also can give you momentum or check certain things defensively. For instance, Zeraora is a good check to things like Togekiss. Cinderace is an okay check to Calm Mind. Clefable, especially with running Gunk Shot, which is more and more common. Because of that, it's very important to not only notice that there are certain progress makers that are offensive presences, and then there are other things that are a bit more black and white. And generally speaking, I prefer more of the former than the latter. In addition to this, something called roll compression, which isn't on this list but is very important, is also something I want to touch on, but I'm going to get more to that later on in the video. So if you're interested in what I mean by that, then, well, it's pretty self-explanatory. Pokemon that can fulfill multiple roles, either multiple things in this checklist or multiple things that you want to fulfill within the context of the game. I'll give some examples of that all the way at the end of the video, though, so be sure to stay tuned. With that said, though, sufficient longevity is another important thing that, again, I think a lot of newer players tend to overlook. Having ample longevity so that you can feel out what the opponent is trying to do, make sure you keep them in check in a long haul, not just flimsy one-time checks, but no, long-term checking and countering of common threats that you might encounter in metagame is of the utmost importance. Sometimes balanced games tend to go beyond turn 40, even 50, and so on and so forth. We've seen a lot of games between two balanced teams that have offensive weapons go well over 100 turns in things like the World Cup Pokemon or even on the ladder. And that is okay. That's part of the game. Being patient is a mode of gameplay that is as important as being aggressive sometimes. And I know that a lot of you guys don't love hearing this, but it is the metagame we play right now, and it's something that we have to conform to as it stands. However, that could change in the future, and it could be a bit more of an aggressive, fast-paced metagame. I know a lot of you would like that. Personally, I'd be interested in that as well. But right now, we have to play the cards that we are dealt. Then there are some Pokemon or groups of Pokemon to keep in mind. Magearna, Cinderace, Volcarona, Urshifu, and Ghost types. Those are just some. You could go through the viability rankings on the Smogon forums or any other threat list that you might be able to encounter and potentially add more or take off from this list as you believe possible. With that said, though, there are a lot of things in the metagame that you have to keep in check, but these are some of the most challenging to do so. Sometimes they take multiple Pokemon to kind of piece together the puzzle of counterplay, if you will. Things like Magearna and Urshifu especially. Cinderace is also just a potent Pokemon, and with a couple U-turns, things like Hippowdon and Mandibuzz, even Toxapex, if you get it in like Zen Headbutt, are not going to be able to always keep you in check, so that is something to keep in mind as well. Anyway, I believe that this is enough coverage of the team building checklist, and while having a checklist is great because you could go down the list and just check these all off, what's really important is making sure you're comfortable with your team. So therefore, I'm going to go over all the elements that might be able to fit on your team and fulfill some of these roles and why you should be comfortable using them. So let me pause for a second and get to that then. Okay guys, we're now back at the team builder, my team builder in particular, so let's go over all of the things that fit onto balanced cores and things that are relevant to balanced team building. So we went down the checklist, as you recall. I'm saying this as if it was a long time ago, but it was literally 30 seconds ago in the video and I was touching on it. But for me, I took a couple minute break. So just as a refresher to myself and you guys, some of the things that are worth noting are going to be hazard removal and hazard setters. Now, I said Stealth Rock setting was borderline mandatory, whereas having spikes or toxic spikes is not mandatory. And I just want to reaffirm that position. Spikes and toxic spikes definitely are not needed on your balance teams, but if you could fit them, then hey, why not? So we'll go over that as well. But yeah, the first thing that I want to cover is removal. There are really 4 or 5 common ways of hazard removal, and the big 3 are going to be Mandibuzz, Excadrill, and Korbinite. Right now, in the 4th, I want to say it's like Toxic Spikes, absorbing Toxic Spikes, but Skarmory is seeing some usage, and Mantine actually was pretty common during parts of World Cup, so why not? But anyway, Xatu is also common. Let's go through them one by one, though. First off, we have Mandibuzz. This spread in particular is nothing special. It just outruns things like Choice Band Tyranitar, Aegislash, Adamant Crawdon, Modest Primarina, and I think there's 1 or 2 other things in that area. Yeah, like Zero Speed Rotoms. That's about it, though. And it's pretty helpful in that it's able to foul play things like Excadrill, Zeraora, Cinderace for a lot of damage, as well as do pretty well against some things you see on Hyper Offense like Bisharp or Swords Dance Aegislash. And it could U-turn to generate momentum. Of course, some other options on it, though, are Knockoff, Toxic, and Brave Bird. You can even see some other moves occasionally, I guess, but this is mainly it. It always is going to be running Roost and Defog. Well, Defog has been bypassed on some teams if you pair it with Korbinite or Excadrill, but yeah, I mean, if you're talking about it as hazard removal, it always has Defog. It's really good at checking things like ghost types, such as Dragapult, barring spec sets, and Aegislash. It doesn't do as great against Nasty Black Gengar, though, unfortunately. It also is good at checking Swords against Excadrill, so long as it doesn't get flinched out. Tends to turn physically defensive because of that at this point in the metagame, but especially defensive sets are viable as well. Moving forward, Excadrill is another good hazard removal. In fact, Excadrill is just a great Pokemon for a number of reasons in this metagame, but focusing in on it as a hazard removal, it has access to Rapid Spin, which not only can do some damage, it also removes hazards, of course, and gives it +1 speed. It tends to be running with Dual Stab and Toxic nowadays because putting Stealth Rock and Rapid Spin in the same set is a bad instance of roll compression, a topic we touched on before. It's just a bit too compressed, and Toxic is amazing to things like Hippowdon, Mandibuzz, Slowbro, Tangrowth, etc., which are all very common checks to it in the metagame, and getting the Toxic off can not only help Excadrill in the long haul, but also some teammates of Excadrill, which is worth noting. This EV Spirit particularly lives a Specs Aura Sphere from Magearna, and some other hits, like I believe it leaves a Shadow Ball from Specs Gengar after like Stealth Rocks all the time. And it also is able to stomach Flare Cannons and Specs Flash Cannons a little easier than it would prior. I don't think it lives 2 Specs Flare Cannons, but it should live 2 Specs Flash Cannons after leftovers, so long as hazards or knockoff or burn or whatever it might be doesn't hamper it down prior, which is helpful, and you just throw the leftover into attack. Max speed is important for opposing Excadrill, Rotom, Heat, etc. There are 1 or 2 teams who have actually ran a slower drill, which is pretty interesting, but you got to be careful in doing that. Anyway, the next most common form of hazard removal, Toxic Spikes, absorbing Toxic Spikes would probably go here, but again, it's not like a Defogger or a Rapid Spinner, so I'm not going to go out of my way to give it a set in this part of the video, would be Korbinite. Korbinite is still kind of rocking as a decent option in the metagame. We've seen people like ABR, Starmaster, and others use Korbinite recently, which is pretty interesting to see it surge back after Mandibuzz took control of the tier pretty much as its main form of hazard removal recently due to the fact that it was able to resist Wicked Blow and check ghost types, among other things. But yeah, Korbinite's still a good option. Physically defensive is a bit more common than specially defensive, but specially defensive is superb for checking things like Master Plat Alakazam as well, so that is worth noting. It tends to run just minus speed with U-turn and body press as long as it can run Roost and Defog. It's fine though. Other options like Brave Bird and Iron Head are worth noting as well. You can also run bulk up sets, but those don't tend to run Defog, so that's less noteworthy in this particular instance. Next off, we have Skarmory. It runs, it can run Spikes, Roost, Body Press, of course Defog on this section, but yeah, other options are Toxic, Taunt, Brave Bird, and Whirlwind, also worth noting. It tends to just run physically defensive. Unlike Korbinite, it's a bit less effective on the special end defensively, so it doesn't really have that flex appeal. But yeah, it's one of the best answers to Excadrill in the game alongside Korbinite, and on top of that, it can shut down things. And if it's able to run Toxic, it's able to hit things like Volcarona, Zeraora, Rotom Heat, Cinderace, Hippowdon, Mandibuzz, etc. Dragapult on the switch in, which is really clutch as well. Next up, we have Mantine, which you can run 200 speed to hit the number 200 to outrun things like Belladrum Azumarill and get that haze off. But Scald, Defog, Hazer Toxic, and Roost is a pretty solid set in conjunction with heavy duty boots. It's arguably the best answer to Volcarona in the tier, really in the game. And on top of that, it also is okay against Cinderace lacking Gunk Shot. It's not really a reliable answer, but it is pretty good against Excadrill too if it doesn't get flinched out, especially because you're able to pump in the physical defense investment and the nature with this spread in particular. Last one is Xatu. We've actually seen a Trick Scarf set on some Sun teams lately, which is pretty cool to bounce back Stealth Rocks, but also you can see this sort of set, I guess, on balanced teams in particular. It's fringe viable. I guess it's worth noting, but not much more than that. Anyway, let's segue really quickly. Okay, so now let's discuss potential Stealth Rock setters in the context of the SSAU metagame. First and foremost, we have Hippowdon, a Pokemon that I used twice in the World Cup of Pokemon, and for good reason. It's a physically defensive behemoth in the context of the context of the metagame. Oh boy, that's just a new low. What am I even trying to say? I don't even need to say context. It's just a good Pokemon on the physical defense. It's a good physical wall. Okay, you get my point? Good, capiche. Whatever. Oh boy. Anyway, Hippowdon is great. Stealth Rock, Earthquake. I prefer Toxic over Whirlwind right now and Slack Off. Toxic just decreases passivity against things like Mandibuzz, Rotom Heat, etc. So that's really helpful. But yeah, it's great against things like Cinderace, Zeraora, especially because Grass Knot is hardly ever used, if ever used right now. And on top of that, it's just great. Bisharp, you name it. It's just able to check a ton of things, Volt Switch immunity, and Stealth Rock, so it's good at roll compression. Yeah, next up we have Clefable. Now, personally, I think that trick sets aren't great, but Trick with Choice Scarf or Sticky Barb. Now, this is a spread I wanted to highlight with Trick Scarf, because if you don't trick the Scarf, you're able to outrun things like Bisharp and Bisharp and Aegislash and Ultramarino with this spread, so it can potentially come in handy like in a clutch situation if you aren't able to trick early on in the game. But what a lot of people do is they just get the trick off turn 1, which is completely fine as well. The 20 speed EVs just aren't a big deal though. There's no specific calc on the special end that this had to account for, because you lose leftovers and you're not necessarily getting them back, so therefore you can't expect yourself to be at 100 anyway. So I was kind of less stingy on running the max special bulk on this set, but yeah, you could also just run knockoff with leftovers, which I run more. Trick also works with Sticky Barb, and I guess Flame Orb as well. I don't really love that though. But yeah, Stealth Rock Clefable is still solid in the metagame. It does really well against Mandibuzz, which is cool. Unfortunately, struggles with Korbinite, Skarmory, and Excadrill, but that's alright. Next up, we have Como-O, which is a good Stealth Rocker. This spread in particular that I'm using here, it lets you get the jump on Bisharp and Aegislash and Primarina, all Aegislash Primarina, including plus speed, Adamant, Bisharp. Special bulk lets you live a +1 Psychic from Volcarona after Stealth Rock, I believe, barring Modest. Modest is a pain in the you-know-what. But anyway, and then you pump the rest in the defense. Yeah, Body Press, Earthquake. I prefer Toxic, but people are running Dragon Tail for Sun teams. Thunder Punch is okay for Rain teams, hitting Pelipper as well. Taunt can be good for Defoggers and other things. Yeah, even Poison Jab, which not only lets you get the revenge kill on a Azumarill, but also can pressure Clefable into making you use more soft-boiled or Wish, which can come in handy as well. Next up, we have Excadrill, which, we've already discussed Excadrill quite a few times, but it's a good Stealth Rock setter as well. But again, I wouldn't run Stealth Rock plus Rapid Spin. I'd run Stealth Rock plus Toxic or Swords Dance to at least make it less passive against things like Hippowdon, Mandibuzz, etc. So yeah, just don't. It's better to decompress Excadrill than to compress Excadrill is what I'm trying to say. Other possible Stealth Rock setters are Rhyperior and Chansey. Rhyperior is a really underrated option right now as well against Cinderace, which are running high jump kick less and less and less due to Gunk Shot, its rise in popularity, and the lack of bulk upsets to mandate high jump kick in my eyes. On top of that, it's really good against Zeraora, Rotom Heat, and it also just has so much physical bulk that it could actually run Adamant with Swords Dance to be sort of a pseudo breaker. Some other options that I think are cool, I haven't yet experimented with, are Mega Horn to catch Roosty Mandibuzz, and also things like Tangrowth and Slowbro, and Focus Punch to cast Roosty Mandibuzz as well. Also could have some other things like hitting Ferrothorn and switching. Fire Punch can be cool too to Ferrothorn, regardless of switching in or just in already. And I think Toxic for a Powdon could be neat too. Anyway, moving past that, Chansey is also a good option as a Stealth Rock setter. Unfortunately, Chansey's seen much worse days due to how common Trick and Knockoff are right now, and the fact that the metagame really is less directly special attacker oriented and more kind of, passive damage oriented, which makes an EV-Light Pokemon like this a lot less practical. In addition, Heavy Duty Boots Blissey is stealing a lot of its spotlight, but Heavy Duty Blissey can't really fit Stealth Rock as much as it wants to run Teleport, aside me to a Softball and either Toxic or Thunder Wave more often than not. Heavy Duty Boots Blissey is arguably just outright better Pokemon than Chansey right now, but Chansey can work on stall teams as a Stealth Rock setter still, so that is worth noting. But yeah, I figured I'd just give it a little honorable mention here. On the topic of hazard setters, though, we also have spikes and toxic spike setters, such as Ferrothorn, Skarmory, Toxapex, Weezing, and then I guess also Mew and Heracross can set those entry hazards as well, but Heracross is better with Swords Dance over Spikes, and Mew is best as a lead on hyper-offensive teams, so I don't really want to give them most spotlight. It's just, the big four, I guess, here. Ferrothorn is obviously a great Pokemon metagame. It's still pretty good against things like Zeraora, and on top of that, Water types struggle to break it. So, yeah, and on top of, well, it's not really a great counter to many things. It's a great pivot, able to get it in repeatedly. And on top of that, the combination of Body Press and Leech Seed actually makes it match up pretty well against things like Korbinite and Mandibuzz. And Knockoff is always a useful move. You've also seen things like the occasional Toxic on it, even Power Whip and Thunder Wave as well. So that's helpful. Skarmory is just, a physically defensive behemoth. It's great in the metagame. Unfortunately, it's a bit worse than Korbinite, which is a bit worse than Mandibuzz, so it's a bit of a third-tier option, but it's still pretty good on specific teams. And if you're able to forego Defog or forego Whirlwind, then you're able to fit Toxic, which helps you beat Defoggers and other Pokemon like Rotom Heat, Dragapult, Hippowdon, so it can actually really come in handy and be a great tool to a lot of teams. Beyond that, we also have Toxic Spikes, which is Toxic Spikes, and Weezing Galar, which is the only hard or Shifu counter in the game. Also does well against things like Huge Power Azumarill and some other Pokemon, but it can set up Toxic Spikes as well, even if it's more of a niche option. So I figured I'd give it a mention as well. Now we're going to segue here into some more offensive options. So I call them offensive pieces in this because I think that's the best way to put it, as there are lots of different forms of them. Now, speed control is important, and you do want to have some form of speed control on every team, and it's not limited to these Pokemon, but just go over it. Zero Aura, Dragapult are fast Pokemon. Ice Drill with Sand Rush on Sand teams is great. Grassy Glide, Rillaboom can be a piece to that puzzle, but maybe not the whole thing. Same with Sucker Punch, Cinderace, and Sucker Punch or Shifu, but yeah, priority is important. But I just want to say I'm doing my next Metagame Monday on speed control. We voted about this on my Discord server, and they wanted the balance video and then the speed control video, basically. So yeah, be sure to join my Discord server, by the way. The link will be in the description. We have over 500 people. It's a really active chat. We discuss Smogon stuff. We discuss OU stuff. We discuss, everything competitive Pokemon, and there's plenty of other chat as well, just, friendly plays. It's very active, so be sure to check that out. But anyway, that is helpful. With that said, though, we're not going to go in-depth on speed control right now because that's going to be next week, and I don't want to kind of, step on my own toes here. So let's get into breakers and progress makers. Actually, that rhymed. Breakers and progress makers. Hey, wow, I am so cheesy. Anyway, these are the Pokemon that, in my eyes, you really want to try and integrate at least one or two of onto these teams in order to try and make progress. Bound to be an offensive catalyst into breaking down the cores of the opposing Pokemon. The best ones, undoubtedly, are the big three of Cinderace, Magearna, and Urshifu. In my eyes, Magearna and Cinderace are the two best offensive and arguably overall Pokemon in the tier right now, and both of them are probably ban-worthy, Magearna in particular. But Cinderace is kind of tearing up the tier in World Cup right now, which is honestly amazing. So yeah. In particular, this is the set people are using. Sometimes use Jolly. I prefer Adamant. I use Adamant twice in World Cup and Jolly once. But yeah, it's really good. It does so much damage. Gunk Shot can one-shot Clefable, for example, and it does a lot of great damage. Also can get the poison on things like Mandibuzz on the switch-in, which can make it basically lose you in the long haul. Zen Headbutt for Toxic Specs and other things that maybe take that super effectively, like Terrakion, Keldeo. And U-Turn is just great utility to get out of there, chip things like Hippowdon and Mandibuzz into eventual 2-KO range. Specs, Magearna, you can run Aura Sphere over Trick, of course. I think Flash Cannon and Floor Cannon Volt Switch are pretty much mandatory right now, though. It's just amazing. I mean, I could do an hour-long video on how good Magearna's spec set is right now. I wouldn't be tired of it, but yeah, it does so much work in the metagame right now. It's always been making progress. It's impossible to counter. You have to play around it really well, and it's really unhealthy in the metagame, honestly, so I just think Specs Magearna is great. Then there's Urshifu. It could run bulk up sets with Black Blaster Life Orb as well. Choice Band is still superb, though. I prefer Jolly, but yeah. People tend to run one of their Regenerator Poison types plus Mandibuzz to take Wicked Blows, as they're ways to counter it. It literally takes two Pokemon, keep it fully in check, but people are overpaying for it with that, and Physically Defensive Clefable, things like Hippowdon and Tangrowth as pivots as well. So, given that, it's harder to say it's more of a broken threat in-game, but it's a really hard Pokemon to deal with team-building-wise, and that's important to know. Next up, we also have really good Pokemon in metagame that aren't quite top 3 worthy or broken, but Hydreigon, Rillaboom, and Alakazam are all great. I'm going to get Zero soon, I think. Maybe not. Maybe I just listed under Voltage Lord. Regardless, Hydreigon with Nasty Plot, same old. Now it's running Roost over Flash Cannon a lot, though, because there are a lot of ways to take advantage of Clefable right now. And the Wishport sets just are less common, so it's not always at full health, which is amazing shifts in the metagame because someone didn't ban Clefable, and now Clefable happens to be a lot healthier in the metagame, so pat on someone's back. But anyway, patience is a virtue, guys, so don't try and rush things to be banned, but definitely ban them when they're problematic, like Magearna right now. But anyway, that aside, Rillaboom, Choice Band set's great. It honestly is better off just spamming U-Turn and Knockoff into things like Ferrothorn, Amoonguss, and Mandibuzz in the early game, but Grassy Glide is amazing against offensive teams. It really just decimates Rain besides Ferrothorn, and Woodhammer is just a nuke move as well. It's able to 2-KO a lot of things, even resists like Mandibuzz after Stealth Rock and Poison, which is super cool. Yeah, and I run this spread because you don't really need max speed, and it lets you take things like Aegislash, Specs Shadow Ball, and Draco Meteors from Dragapult as well. And then next up, Nasty Plot Alakazam is just amazing right now if you hit Focus Blast, but of course that is a huge if. This is not it for offensive breakers and progress makers, though. We also have a whole second quote-unquote team worth of them. These obviously aren't teams. Someone in the comments of the last one said they actually imported one of these as a team and thought they could use it, and they got 1,500 or something. I find that hilarious, but no, these aren't teams. It's just specific categories. I will try and paste these all into the movie description, though. Anyway, next up we have Exegil, Volcarona, Rotom Heat, Magearna again, a different set because it's just that good. Crodon and Dragapult. I guess there's no Zeraora, but Zeraora kind of is a progress maker, not a breaker though. It's actually pretty weak. Anyway, Swords Dance Drill is great. Sand Rush can be run. It can be run a Mold Breaker as well. It really just depends on your team, obviously. If you've got Sand Rush, otherwise Mold Breaker. But yeah, Stealth Rock, Swords Dance plus Toxic is just really great in my eyes. Volcarona, I really prefer this set. Substitute is amazing against things like Mandibuzz and Toxapex and Rotom Heat with Toxic. Basically, with this EV spread, you're able to live things like a Discharge from Rotom Heat, or a Scald from Toxapex, or a Foul Play from Mandibuzz. Add a substitute. Plus, if you're +1 special defense on the defensive end, on the special defensive end, but Foul Play you live regardless of that because it's a physical move, obviously. But yeah, and then just set up on them, and you really only need bug coverage for things like Tyranitar, which you never ever see, and Hydreigon, which you can wear out and eventually beat with Quiver Dance plus Fiery Dance. Anyway, Modest lets Fiery Dance to cure things like Physical Defensive Clefable and Physical Defensive Mandibuzz, which are very common right now, and Psychic still with Modest also is able to nuke things like Como-O and eventually Toxapex and so on and so forth. So yeah, of course 3 attacks with Bug Buzz is still fine. Roost over substitute into different EV threat is fine. And you can of course run Timid as well. So yeah, there are a lot of things you could do, but Volk is just a great sweeper. But unfortunately, as I was alluding to before, it's a bit more of a hit or miss Pokemon. Sometimes you're not getting a bang for your buck with Volcarona, and that is unfortunate and is worth noting here as well. Anyway, other options are Nasty Plot, Rotom Heat, which is just a great Pokemon in general. It also provides a lot of defensive utility, so hint, another instance of roll compression, because that's like the key flashy word of the day, the key flashy word, not the keyword, not the flashy word, the key flashy word of the day, sure. Let's go with that. Anyway, Subcommand Magearna is a Pokemon that a lot of people have been using in World Cup Pokemon, and it's a really nice Pokemon to take advantage of things like Toxapex and Amoonguss right now, especially if they don't have a fire type like Rotom Heat to keep it in check. This is just a spread I use. You're able to live, crap, what is it that you're living? Hold up, 1 second, I'll pause. Okay, as I paused there, remembered. So you're living let's say you're facing a Combine Clef, and either it's Life Orb knocked it off, or it's not Life Orb, because a lot of them are running leftovers right now. You're living a Flamethrower when you're at +1 special defense behind a substitute. So you're able to potentially win that 1v1, especially with the special attack investment, because after Combine, Flare Cannon is just Nuke City. So that's helpful for that interaction, especially if you're not running something like Haze Toxapex or Gunk Shot Cinderace on that team. This is just something I took off a particular team I was using that had neither of those options. And yeah, speed lets you at 200. People have been running more defense on it, or even maxing out HP, running more speed, less speed, whatever. There's a ton of things you could do, but it's a really cool set, and it's definitely better than the Draining Kiss Third Power set, which just isn't able to break through things like, Hippowdon or Cinderace, Rotom Heat, Haze Toxapex, etc., unless it's running, a lot of support for those things. So Subcombine definitely wants this coverage in my eyes. Or Ice Beam over Flare Cannon, I guess, but that makes it kind of sucky out trying to break teams. It's not as good against things like Excadrill and Clefable. Yeah, anyway, moving forward, Crawdon, something my boy Marco, it's not adamant. Well, it can run Jolly to speed time Magearna and outrun things like Mandibuzz and Aegislash as well, but Aegislash isn't really used, and Mandibuzz tends to run 1,000,001 different spreads, so Adament's really cool. It's just an absolute killer. If you're not facing Como, it's getting kills in the game. You gotta get it in safely with things like Teleport, but yeah, no, it's a good option. And then Specs Dragapult, we've already discussed so many different things, inflicting status, and even we're gonna get to status absorbers soon, I believe, yeah. So because of that, it's really important to have something that views status being spread, and Specs Hex Dragapult is one of the best things. Of course, you'd also run Heavy Duty Boots, Spell Tag, Leftovers, etc. It's a really versatile Pokemon, but yeah, I think Specs is just a great breaker as well as a progress maker, and I rhymed again because that's the title, and I don't know why I did this. It's gonna bug me now, whatever. Specs Dragapult's lit, guys. Anyway, this is not it. There's still more to go through, so let's discuss the so now we're going to be going over the defensive cores, the metagame. So 2 of them I'm not even going into much detail on are just kind of standard defensive backbones and regenerator cores. So right now, since Urshifu got introduced to the tier, people have been using a regenerator poison type like Toxapex or Amoonguss, and basically they switched it on Urshifu turn 1. Worst case scenario, they go Wicked Blow, they do 55, 60, 65% damage. You get your Black Sludge, you do Rock Yump to them, so you're making some progress, and then you switch out to Mandibuzz. Now, ideally, they wasted 2 Wicked Blow PP. You've only taken about 25 to 30% net damage, and it's easier to bring your Toxapex or Amoonguss into your Regenerator than it is for them to bring their offensive or Shifu in. So these cores can suffocate our Shifu. They do really well against it. Of course, alternatively, you can run things like Leftovers, Max Physical Defensive with Powdon to check Adamant Choice Bandit, a Jolly Choice Bandit or Shifu, or things like Physically Defensive Clefable to check the stabs. But yeah, no, these cores are pretty foolproof in that regard. They also do well against other things. They just kind of fit teams really nicely right now. So that was kind of the idea behind them. So it's a standardish defensive backbone. It's just worth noting. And best case scenario, of course, with these cores is you go Pex first, or Amoonguss first. They go close combat, and then not only have they wasted close combat PP, but also you're able to do whatever you want with these Pokemon, as you're not going to get 2-KO'd by close combat. In fact, it's not even always a 3-KO in Toxapex, which is cool. And you can run more physical defense than this. It's just this spread in particular, I use a knockoff variant often because it lives a Life Orb Psychic from Alakazam, and knocking off to retaliate back is amazing. So, yeah. Especially since they usually nasty plot or try and predict and double out or something against you. So, if you catch them like that, it's going to go well. Basically is what I'm trying to say. Anyway, beyond the standard defensive backbone, there is plenty more. Regenerator cores, for example, they're pretty straightforward. Slowbro pairs well with Amoonguss, and Tangrowth pairs well with Toxapex just because of the complementary merits of their typing. I'm not going to go into depth on them a ton because it's pretty straightforward. Basically, Regenerator lets you survive a ton so you're not wasting a million turns recovering, and you're able to pivot in, try and inflict status, try and get chip on things. Yeah, Tangrowth and Slowbro in particular are really good about this. Slowbro because it has Teleport and Scald. Tangrowth because, it has a million different moves and decent base attacking stats as well as access to sleep. But obviously Toxapex is one of the best Pokemon in metagame. And speaking of Pokemon, Unknown Pokemon I'm using as Little Divider now is literally not usable in the game because the only move it used was Hidden Power, and now Hidden Power is not a move, so what the hell is going on with that? But anyway, a little sidebar aside, yeah, these are all great cores as well. Obviously, they require more support. You're going to see these with Mandibuzz or Clefable almost always for things like Wicked Blow and other reasons, Ghost Resist when it comes to Mandibuzz, so it's worth noting. But yeah, definitely solid cores that can be resorted to. Next up, we also have status absorbers, something that's really important. So I'm actually going to pause just to make sure I know what I'm going to say, and then I'll get to this in 1 second, guys. Okay, let me put it this way. You know how there are so many Pokemon you have to keep in check or counter in the metagame? For example, you want to have something to check Cinderace, like Hippowdon, or physically defensive Mandibuzz plus Toxapex. Because, you want to be sturdy against Pokemon that gets in and out with U-turn a lot, or something like Magearna. You want to have something to take Flare Cannon and a Volt Switch. You know how that's really important? Checking Pokemon. Checking what the Pokemon can do beyond offensive things is also important too. So there's a whole offensive spectrum of progress making and damaging attacks. Then there's also a whole defensive spectrum. Things like Toxic, Scald, Knockoff, etc. All of those things can make progress in their own unique way. Status is very important in the metagame right now. Being able to check status is just as important as checking any individual Pokemon. So having something like a Magikarp Pokemon like Clefable, or Reuniclus, or a Natural Cure Pokemon like Chansey or Blissey, or even a Regenerator Pokemon that's okay pivoting in and out and just taking an burn, or even a Toxic is really important. So fitting status absorbers or abusers on the team right now is really important. In a metagame without something like Poison Heal on Gliscor, or even if you go back a couple generations, Poison Heal on, say, Breloom, is kind of vacant of them. So all of a sudden, you need a lot more to take accountability for that on your teams. And because of that, I think it's really great that people are using things like Clefable, Toxapex, Slowbro as often as they are. And I know you're like, oh no, not these stolly Pokemon that make metagames last forever. I get it, but there are necessary evils in metagames where status is as common as they are. I hope you understand that, because the fact of the matter is that you're not going to have a well-rounded team without accounting for status absorbing. So I think that's really worth noting. I'm not going to go through every individual Pokemon here, but you get the gist, I hope. And if not, let me know in the comments. I will elaborate on this, because this is something that's important that so many people overlook. I see so many teams on the ladder that are just waiting to be preyed on by Toxapex. So yeah. Anyway, moving beyond that, we also have Volt Switch immunities, and then we're going to get to roll compression, something that is like the keyword, the key buzzword, the key flashword, whatever you want to call it of the day, because I just keep messing up these terms. So yeah, I don't know why I don't have sets for these last three, but you've already seen our Rhyperior set, and then Gastrodon I haven't actually used these two Pokemon in the metagame, but basically anything that's immune to Volt Switch, it's nice to have one of these on your team, just so you kind of deter Magearna from clicking Volt Switch a million times and Zero Aura from clicking Stab Move a million times. It's that straightforward. It's really that simple. Extra Drill, Powdon, your own Zero Aura, Rhyperior, Gastrodon, Dirgisby. It's really great to have one of these on your team, so definitely consider them. Obviously, the first 3 or 4, I think Rhyperior is actually great right now. The first 3 especially are like more common than the next 3 in the metagame, but they all can work. So yeah, beyond that, we also are going to discuss role compression if the team builder ever loads. Okay, perfect. Role compression. Basically, there are some Pokemon that fulfill multiple roles. For example, Toxapex can not only be your status absorber, but also provide you with a lot of longevity and help knock off or status opposing Pokemon. And on top of that, check things like Cinderace or combine Clefable with Haze, or insert. You can be one of the ways to help check Urshifu, and it can potentially haze off Volcarona. So it does 1,000,001 different things. Another alternative for that is, say Clefable. It's another great role compression. Not only is it a status absorber, but also can set up Stealth Rock or Wish Pass, or also check things like Urshifu, Hawlucha, and come in on Scalds. There's 1,000,000 things it could do. Mandiba is another great example. It could defog, it could knock, it could check Excadrill, it can check Ghost types, it can be a ground immune. Go on and on and on. Hippowdon, it can set up Stealth Rocks, it can triple things with Toxic, it can check things like Zeraora and Bisharp, and potentially Cinderace. So it goes on, Drill is a Volt Switch immunity like Hippowdon, and it's a Steel type, so it's able to resist things like Floor Cannon. It's able to set up Stealth Rocks or Rapid Spin, get Toxic off to cripple things, sweep things with Swords Dance. It can do 1,000,001 things. Of course, you can't do them all. Drill is a Pokemon that's best to decompress a little bit, but Excadrill is still a great Pokemon if you're able to fit it on your team the right way. Same goes for Slowbro. It's a bit less of a role compression like Superstar like these first 5 Pokemon, but Regenerate and Teleport allows it to pivot. Wall could also be a wall, and a good pivot into things like, Cinderace. So, yeah, it does a lot. It could also Scald Burn. Future Sight to synergize really nicely with things like Urshifu or Heracross. So, a lot of great things it does. Beyond this, though, beyond role compression, I do want to give you guys an example of a balanced team, which I've used to a lot of success. So, we're going to go ahead and pause for a second. Okay, guys, so here is the sample team for a balanced team. It's what I used in the World Cup Pokemon against Solwind, a really strong competitor. Arguably one of the best players of all time. I made a video on the best players of all time on Smogon, so feel free to check that out. But it's from a couple months ago, so the quality is not great. But anyway, I'm going to upload that battle on my channel eventually, but it's over 100 turns, so not going to go through it now. But the team is something I really loved. I wanted to use a specific core of Specs Magearna plus Toxapex. That was because I thought Toxapex would be great, as he tends to use balanced teams, so it'd be great for a status absorber. And on top of that, it's able to Scald Burn things, knock them off, and check bulky win conditions like, Clefable. So it's really helpful there. On top of that, Specs Magearna, in my eyes, is always good at forcing progress, so it kind of takes matchup out of the hands in a little bit of a sense, in that it's always going to do well. And I used Trick over Orisphere in this team just because I was worried he might bring a Stall to your team, and I didn't think he was likely to use Ferrothorn, because in my prior game I used Rotom Heat plus Cinderace with a durable defogger, so yeah. Anyway, with those two in mind, I knew I needed a couple of things. First off, I wanted to make sure I had something that complemented the Volt Switches from Magearna, offensively speaking. Magearna Volt Switches in on things like Toxapex and to do a lot of damage to them, and Amoonguss because they're trying to resist a Floor Cannon a lot, and something to take advantage of that was great. So I was thinking, okay, maybe Nasty Plot Alakazam, or maybe Nasty Plot Rotom Heat, or Cinderace. Ultimately, I went through all my options. I had like a dozen different drafts of the team I put in my chat. And what I came up with was Cinderace, Adamant, Gunk Shot, just, the standard one, because this is the best set right now, I'd say. And it actually worked really well. But with these 3 Pokemon, I knew I still needed a lot of things defensively covered. I wasn't doing too great against Urshifu's Wicked Blow. I only had Magearna to check it. And on top of that, I was pretty weak to Excadrill and opposing Cinderace still. So I threw on Mandibuzz to help check those things, and also Ghost types, and Hippowdon to give me a Volt Switch immunity, Stealth Rocks, and a secondary check to things like Excadrill, which also allowed me to run a specially defensive Mandibuzz, which helps against Dragapult, and live a +2 from Alakazam, which was a really menacing Pokemon right now with Dazzling Gleam. So yeah, that was a great core to help round things out. I also was able to have Toxic on Hippowdon, which helped spread status, but I knew I still was a little bit slow because Cinderace is my fastest Pokemon. I wanted something quicker than that. And I also really wanted a Ghost type to abuse the status I had between Toxapex and Hippowdon. So I ultimately decided to turn Dragapult, last Pokemon. Heavy Duty Boots was something I strongly considered, but Leftovers ultimately was great, and Thunder Wave helps paralyze things, which gives Cinderace more chance to break through, as well as Magearna more chance to come in. So ultimately I used this set. Heavy Duty Boots and Spell Tag are viable as well. I don't think I wanted to use Specs here a ton because being locked into the move wasn't great in this build in particular, but yeah, it rounded out team real nicely, so I ultimately came up with this as a 6, and then I was able to emerge victorious in that game, which is really cool. Which is great. So yeah, this is the team. Now, if you have any questions about the team, let me know in the comments. I'd love to discuss common matchups and how I handled them. But I really do love this team. So yeah, this is an example balanced team. I hope you enjoyed. I know I didn't go in like super in depth on it, but I think we kind of went in depth on all the different elements of balanced teams before. So I didn't really want to beat a dead horse. These videos tend to be between 40 minutes and an hour, and we're just over the 40-minute mark. And personally, I'm hungry, so I'm gonna go ahead and grab some lunch now. But I hope you guys have a great day, and I hope you guys enjoyed this. Again, if you like this stuff, please, guys, consider leaving a like on the video and commenting not only your favorite part, but also any questions you have, or just say comment or something for the algorithm. Why the hell not? It means the world to me. And last but not least, if you enjoy the stuff I put out, feel free to subscribe, guys, for the sake of Whooper and Wooloo. Come on, guys, save them for real. Keep them going. But yeah, let's try and hit 4,000 this week. That'd mean the world to me. But thank you guys so much for your support, and I hope you guys enjoyed this deep dive into balanced cores and team building. Peace out.